From staffs, to spears, to whips, to swords, to stuff that isn't really that useful. Chinese Kung Fu has an enormous array of weapons. And actually, in case you're wondering, that weapon just now was a Buddhist monk's spade, or chanzheng, and the half-moon end of it is used for defending against small or medium-sized animals like wild dogs or leopards. In this video, we are going to go through some of the incredible array of weapons in the Chinese martial arts and explain some of the history behind them and what they are for. This is Chinese Kung Fu Weapons Explained. So Chinese weapons are split into two large categories. You have 冷兵器, or cold weapons, and 火器, or fire weapons. The easiest way to explain it is that cold weapons are those that rely on physics only. Think swords slashing, spears stabbing, or even a crossbow shooting a projectile. Whereas fire weapons use chemistry, and in most cases that is going to mean gunpowder, or 火药, which the Chinese invented. And they did use it in war. Zhuge Liang famously used a fire attack during the battles in the Three Kingdoms period. Now, going back to cold weapons, there are over 100 types. But there are several lists of the 18 most common weapons. For example, one list compiled in the Ming Dynasty takes you through some of the most common weapons around, including the spear, the crossbow, the straight sword, broadsword, and a few that are hard to translate since we have no equivalent in the West. Shaolin has its own list of 18 weapons, and there's also another list of 18 in the classic Chinese novel Shui Hu Zhuan, or Outlaws of the Marsh. All these are variations on the same list with just a few differences. But from the 18, we can narrow it down further, getting rid of the ones only used by the military, like crossbows, and the more rare specialized ones, to the 4 most important weapons in Chinese martial arts, and they are known as 四大名器, or the 4 famous weapons. These are the primary weapons used in Chinese Kung Fu, and they are the staff, the broadsword, the straight sword, and the spear. And each one has its own characteristics, and we are going to go through them all. So let's get started. The staff, or gun. The staff is known as 百兵之长, the grandfather of the 100 weapons. In Shaolin Kung Fu, the staff is the first weapon that students typically learn and serves as the base for all long weapon techniques. Since the staff has no blade, it requires training for the practitioner to be able to transfer force into the weapon. But once that is learned, the staff can deliver deadly force, and this skill can be transferred on to other weapons too. Knowing how to use a staff is especially useful since it is the easiest type of weapon to fashion out of a pole or other types of objects that might be lying around, like a broom, or a bamboo pole that was originally intended for some other purpose. Shaolin monks have always emphasized the staff as their main weapon. Even though Shaolin Kung Fu includes techniques with just about every weapon that exists, these Buddhist monks' weapon of choice was the staff, due to it not having a blade. It could be used to simply knock out an opponent, and when they awoke, they may realize that fighting is not good and turn over a new leaf in life, hopefully. And the monks would not accumulate the kind of karma that comes with killing lives.
不可杀生。
Let's now move on to the next of the 4 famous weapons. The broadsword, or 刀. This is referred to as 百兵之帅, the general of the 100 weapons. So 刀 just means knife in Chinese, and this basically means that it is only sharp on one edge. The other edge of the weapon is blunt and can make contact with the martial artist's body with no injury. There are a huge variety of knives, from the very long 偃月刀, which is the one that's really known as the general. You then have horse cutting knives, with smaller knives like the dandao or single knife being known as 百兵之胆, or the bravest of the 100 weapons. Since the area that the dandao can threaten is small, it is a short-range weapon, and thus it has to be brave and ferocious. The dao can also be used in pairs, and this is called 双刀. One has to be skilled to not cut off one's own arm when using them in pairs. The knife in general is a slashing weapon, not a stabbing weapon, So many moves will slash at the soft or weaker parts of an opponent's body or his horse's body, and they will then bleed to death. The dao, in all its different types, was the most common type of blade weapon used on Chinese military battlefields throughout history. But now let's move on to another type of weapon used by the military in ancient China, and that would be the spear, or qiang. The spear is referred to as Bai Bing Zhi Wang, or the king of the 100 weapons. It has a long history on Chinese battlefields, with one very notable practitioner being the Song Dynasty general Yue Fei. Yue Fei is a Chinese folk hero and is credited with creating the internal martial art of Xingyi boxing, based on the movements of the spear.
形意拳，奉岳飞为祖师，所谓脱枪为拳，钻。
The particular spear that Yue Fei would have used in battle was a mao, which is a larger, more rigid battle spear. But the main type of spear you see in non-military martial arts, and especially martial arts movies, is made of waxwood, which is more flexible and can bend. There are less metal parts on it, and the blade is smaller, so it would be cheaper to manufacture than the battle spear. The spear has a leaf-shaped blade with a horsehair tassel below it. Modern martial arts instructors say that the tassel serves a couple of purposes. One is that it blurs the opponent's vision just behind the blade, making it harder for them to reach behind that blade and grab the pole of the spear. And two, it soaks up blood from the blade, which is probably why it's red in color, making it less likely that blood from the spear runs down the pole, making it harder to handle. But another explanation of the tassel is that it shows the rank of the soldier using the spear. There are many different types of spears, ranging in size from 3 feet or 1 meter to 15 feet or 5 meters long. Some are designed to be used on horseback, some on foot, and against both humans and wild animals. In more recent times, another famous practitioner of the spear was Li Shuwen, who practiced the martial art of Ba Ji Quan, or 8 extremities boxing. He had the nickname Shen Qiang Li, or God Spear Li. He would supposedly leave the spear by his door to his house, and whenever he went in or out, he would practice 50 repetitions of a certain spear move. Li got so good at the spear that he could kill a fly resting on a thin paper window without breaking the paper. Li's catchphrase was that he never had to hit an opponent twice. So we can see that the spear was used in both military applications and by civilian martial artists. As for the spear being the king of weapons, this comes from the fact that it is a very sharp blade stuck on the end of a long pole. It is a long-range weapon that is hard to get around when it's pointing at you. Even a relatively unskilled person could be deadly with a spear in their hands. Spears were also cheap to manufacture compared to swords and knives, which used a lot more metal. So spears were definitely a weapon of choice when equipping an army. But now let's look at our final weapon. Although the spear is the king, and I was originally thinking of putting the spear last, but I think this next weapon really takes it to another level in terms of skill and art, and thus we give you the straight sword, or jian. And the straight sword is known as Bai Bing Zhi Jun, or the Gentleman of the 100 Weapons. Now, straight swords were used in battle way back in the Zhou dynasty, which is one of China's 3 ancient dynasties, but were later replaced by the dao, or knife, that we talked about earlier, as the blade weapon of choice for soldiers on Chinese battlefields. The straight sword then became more of a ceremonial weapon and a weapon used by civilians and non-military martial artists for self-defense. These swords are sharp on both edges, so they lack the strength of a dao, where the blunt edge can be thicker to strengthen the blade. The straight sword is also harder to master, requiring far more training than the dao. But these weapons became a favorite of the cultured classes, where the art part of martial arts started to take precedence over the fighting aspect. The word for martial and the word for dance in Chinese are pronounced exactly the same, wu, and some believe this to be an inner meaning hidden in Chinese culture by the gods. In the Tang Dynasty, sword dances started to become popular, and at first they were performed by warriors, but later women in the imperial court with no martial training started performing these dances. One such woman was called Gong Sun. Famous poet Du Fu saw her dance when he was young, and years later, when he was watching a group of dancers perform a sword dance at the home of another government official, he was amazed and asked who their teacher was, and it turned out it was the same woman, the legendary Gong Sun. So he wrote a poem about her while he was watching the students perform. There once was a beautiful woman named Gong Sun. As she dances, her sword shoots out in 4 directions. A lot of people watched and were shocked. For this dance, heaven and earth rose and fell together. Once she started to dance, it was like the legendary archer Hou Yi shooting 9 suns out from the sky. Her movements were nimble and precise, like gods in the heavens riding dragons. However, despite the artistic aspects and association with the literati classes, the straight sword is still an effective martial weapon, and it has a particular association with one sect of Chinese martial arts, Wudang. You can trace the history back to the legendary sage Zhang Sanfeng, who was a wandering Taoist and spent time at Wudang Mountain, one of China's sacred mountains of Taoism. It is now a World Heritage Site, home to a sprawling temple complex that was mostly built in the Ming Dynasty. Zhang is considered the grandfather of the Wudang martial arts and also the founder of Tai Chi. His 9 main disciples created 9 branches of his arts, and 3 of those branches focused on the straight sword. Many of these disciples and their students became wandering Taoists and carried straight swords with them for self-defense. The straight sword was considered the hardest weapon to master. There is a saying, 100 days with the knife, 1,000 days with the spear, and 10,000 days with the sword, referring to the amount of time it takes to master each weapon. The Wudang sword had a resurgence of popularity in China in relatively modern times because of a military officer called Li Jinglin around the turn of the century, who became known for his incredible sword skill in combat using Wudang techniques. In the West, it is the movie Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon that really popularized the Chinese straight sword. The movie follows Wudang master Li Mubai and his Green Destiny sword, and the sword is practically the main character of the movie. So the gentleman of Chinese weapons lives up to its name as a weapon that requires skill and finesse and takes way longer to master than any of the other 3. And thus it opens a door into something that is truly practice of an art linked to the spiritual practice of Taoism and not just a way of defending oneself. And guys, if this has piqued your interest for traditional Chinese arts, my co-host Jared is currently touring with Shenyun Performing Arts, the world's premier Chinese classical dance company, on their world tour, and they may be coming to a city near you. If you want to watch the trailer or look into getting a ticket for yourself, check out the first link in the description. But there is more. If you want to learn Chinese classical dance for yourself, which, as you get to higher levels, includes dances with some of the traditional weapons that we've talked about in this video, but it also includes incredible dance moves and health benefits, go to learnchinesedance.com or click the second link down in the description below, and that will take you to the Shenyun Arts Proficiency Assessment Center page, where you can join live online training classes or buy individual online courses that you can watch and train techniques at your own pace. There are 10 levels in the program, from beginner to advanced, and the classes are taught by world-class instructors, many of whom have toured the world and performed in some of the most prestigious theaters with Shenyun Performing Arts. So that website is learnchinesedance.com, or click the second link down in the description below. Please subscribe to the channel if you're new. Check out some of our other videos on Chinese martial arts on screen now, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.